But the biggest punch to the gut came 24 hours later on Thursday with the news that beautiful Bobby Eaton had passed away on Stan Lane's birthday, no less. And 10 days shy of his own 63rd birthday. One half of the Midnight Express, one of the most respected workers of all time, and by every account, one of the nicest wrestlers in the business. He had fallen about 2 weeks ago and broken some fingers. He banged up his hip. He was in the hospital for about 10 days, and he was being sent somewhere for physical therapy, I believe. But something happened. And Eaton already was not in the greatest of health for some time. His daughter Taryn is the one who found him, according to Eaton's sister. Truly one of the greatest tag team specialists of all time. And I didn't grow up on the Midnight Express and the Rock and Roll Express and sort of all of that great NWA wrestling or Mid-South, anything that came before it. But I certainly became familiar with who the Rock and Roll Express were and the Midnight Express were, and I saw a lot of their matches. And it was every bit as good as people, would say that it is. Eaton and Dennis Condrey, with Jim Cornette as their manager, they were a legendary trio. They first linked up in Mid-South, and then they went to World Class, and ultimately Jim Crockett Promotions. When Condrey left in '87, he was replaced by Stan Lane. And when Lane and Cornette left WCW, Bobby stayed. And he had a pretty good singles career as well. I mean, he was really more well-known for his tag team run, but he had a pretty good singles career. He won the WCW television title. He had some great matches against Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, a young Steve Austin, among others. He joined Paul Heyman's Dangerous Alliance faction, which I think is one of the more underrated groups of all time. He won the WCW World Tag Team titles as part of that group with Arn Anderson. Eaton was part of what I ranked as one of the 15 best matches in WCW history. Sting's Squadron against the Dangerous Alliance in a War Games match at Wrestle War 92. So if you're looking for some great Bobby Eaton viewing, make sure that match is on your list, along with almost any of the matches between the Midnights and the Rock and Roll Express, and the Midnight Express against the Southern Boys at the 1990 Great American Bash. I didn't see that match until, I don't know, it was 5 years ago, whatever it was, a few years ago for the first time. I think the only match I'd ever really seen from that show was Sting and Flair. That's the night that Sting got his big world title win over Ric Flair after he came back from the knee injury. But I don't recall having ever seen that entire Great American Bash show until a few years ago. And that was probably the greatest match on the entire card between the Midnight Express and the Southern Boys. So again, that's just a small sample. I mean, I'm sure, a lot of people can put together a list of 10, 15, 20 different Bobby Eaton matches, who probably saw more Bobby Eaton matches than I did. But that would be a nice little sample to start out with, if you're not familiar with his work. The Blue Blood stuff that he did in the mid-90s really was the last serious push of his wrestling career, where Lord Steven Regal was recruiting him as Earl Robert Eaton, trying to teach him proper dining etiquette, and they were doing like comedy skits together. Eventually, they added Dave Taylor to the group as Squire David Taylor. They had a butler named Jeeves. They feuded with Harlem Heat. They never did win the tag team titles, though, before Eaton split away and ended up feuding with them. But, again, you will not find a bad word said about Bobby Eaton either as a wrestler or as a person. As a wrestler, he threw a wicked right hand. And he would get some great height on that Alabama Jam. Big leg drop off the top rope. Never hurt a soul with it, except himself. I mean, you can only come off the top rope with that leg drop, or with a knee drop, he would do that too. You can only do that so many times before it just wrecks your body. And he was no different. He was in a lot of pain. It's one of the reasons why when Fandango made his WWE debut, and Johnny Curtis would always go up to the top rope and hit the top rope leg drop. It looks great, but it's not a move that is going to lend itself to a very long career, or if it does, you're going to end up in a lot of pain. Hulk Hogan was doing leg drops just hitting the ropes. And he ended up with 10 back surgeries. Imagine if he was doing it off the top. But Bobby was so smooth in everything that he did. You can see why he gets the praise that he does from the people he shared the ring with. He wasn't much to look at. I mean, there was really nothing exceptional when you took a look at this guy. If you didn't know who he was, he just kind of looked like your prototypical Southern pro wrestler, right? With the freaking blonde mullet, and there was nothing when you looked at him that jumped out and said superstar until he started working. And then you realize how good he really was. But you're going to hear a lot of Bobby Eaton stories from people that knew him and people that worked with him. I started listening to Jim Cornette's latest podcast episode because he and Eaton were very, very close, obviously having worked together and known each other for so many years. And Cornette could barely make it through the first 10 minutes of the show. I had to stop it. I may go back and listen to the rest later because I know he ended up doing 2 hours. But he was just beside himself with grief. But my favorite Bobby Eaton story is, and I'm sure you've heard some other people probably talk about it, is when he started dating his wife Donna, who just passed away from breast cancer herself at the end of June. She just died at the end of June, and you wonder how much that must have weighed on Bobby. Because you hear about that, maybe he died of a broken heart more than anything else. I mean, that coupled with his other health issues could not have been good. When Road Dogg lost his parents last year, Bullet Bob died 2 months almost to the day after his wife passed away. You hear about stories like that a lot. Especially the older you are, when one spouse passes away and the other one follows not too long after. But Donna was the daughter of Memphis wrestling legend Bill Dundee. The same Bill Dundee who once pulled a gun on Randy Savage. I know I've told that story before. But Bill had a rule. And his rule was that no wrestlers were to date his daughter. They were not even to speak with her. So when Bobby and Donna started dating, they kept the relationship a secret from her father for, I think it was about 9 months. Long time. Well, she eventually confessed to him that she was dating one of the wrestlers while they were having family dinner. And as Bobby tells the story, Dundee dropped his fork on the table and he starts cursing. He wants to know who it is. Who is it? Who is this guy? So he can make sure the guy never found work in this business again. And when she told him that it was Bobby Eaton, at first he didn't say a word. He just picked up his fork. He went right back to eating and he said, "You picked the right one." And they stayed married for all of these years until she passed away. They had 3 kids together. But Eaton was known for his generosity. He would carry around these giant suitcases where, wherever he would go, really, when he was on the road, and think of all the towns those guys were making back in the day. He would have these giant bags, and he would go with all sorts of toiletries and towels and sewing kits and stuff. So if the boys lost something or they had to borrow something, they knew they could go to Bobby. And he was almost guaranteed he would have it in there somewhere. In his first book, Mick Foley talked about how it wasn't uncommon for he and Bobby, when they were riding together, to stop off at a gas station and for him to meet somebody and give them money if they needed it. Cornette told a funny story once about that. He and Dennis Condrey, they were in the car at a gas station waiting for Bobby to come out of the mini mart, and he comes walking out with this homeless guy and a huge bag of stuff that he bought for him. Food, there's liquors, a cigar in there, but that's the kind of person he was. In his Broken Skull Sessions interview, I tweeted this out the other day when the news broke. First thing I thought of, Bill Goldberg. He admitted in that interview he did with Steve Austin many months ago, and other interviews too, that he wanted to put Bobby Eaton over in Eaton's hometown on his birthday during the period where Goldberg still had his undefeated streak. It would have been a dark match, but still, he wanted to have Eaton beat him, and WCW refused. He was begging Arn Anderson to let him put Bobby over. I guess Arn was the agent, begging him to let him put Bobby Eaton over. Bobby had taught him so much, and he helped him on his way up in training, but they just wouldn't allow it. Now, of course, today, Goldberg admits that at the time, he didn't know much about the wrestling business, and it would have been ridiculous for them to let Bobby Eaton beat Bill Goldberg, which it would have. It absolutely would have been a stupid thing for them to do. But it says something about what Goldberg thought of him, that he would have been that adamant about wanting to kind of pay it back and put this guy over on his birthday in his hometown and give him that kind of special moment. Had he gotten his way, I imagine WCW would have just ignored it on TV. But there was a WCW Worldwide match, I want to say from 97 or 98, that people were sharing on social media this week with Bobby Eaton and Randy Savage, who at the time was with the NWO, and this was like the NWO at its peak. He was in the NWO, he was a heel. He was wrestling Eaton, and he was giving Bobby Eaton way more than guys of that caliber normally would to somebody who by then, Eaton was pretty low down on the food chain. He wasn't really getting wins over anybody of note. But there's Savage having a competitive match with him in studio on that Worldwide show. And watching that clip, by the way, watching that match, it really hit me to see Randy Savage, Bobby Eaton, Elizabeth, who was on the outside in Savage's corner, and Mark Curtis, Brian Hildebrand, as the referee. All gone. Every single one of them now gone. But you look at the outpouring of love and all of the tweets and the messages, not just from the old school wrestlers, but from the new school. People who he helped train, people he gave advice to, or just people who studied his work when they were coming up trying to become a pro wrestler. That is how you measure one's influence. But his influence and his impact on the wrestling business is immeasurable. Here's a man who spent his prime years in the ring working as a heel, and yet is widely regarded as one of the nicest people in the business. It speaks to just how damn good he was at his job, but also the fact that the wrestling business would be a much better place if it had more people in it like Bobby Eaton.